Well, it's a tough act to follow the Quran, but I will do my best. The freedom of speech is our fundamental bulwark against tyranny. It is the one protection that we have in the United States and in other Western nations to varying degrees, and in other nations around the world in some places. It is our fundamental protection against the government being able to do whatever it wants and to crush dissenting voices. Any group that is beyond criticism, any individual or group or policy or belief or anything that is beyond criticism can work its will without hindrance upon those it opposes. And that is the very definition of tyranny. We are far closer to this in the United States today than most people realize. People say, well, we have the First Amendment, and so really you got nothing to worry about because this First Amendment guarantees the freedom of speech, and therefore no tyrant will be able to crush dissent and work his will untrammeled upon the American people. But the thing about the First Amendment is that it doesn't enforce itself. It doesn't interpret itself. It does not protect or defend itself. And it can be legislated away just as much as the Second Amendment has been in many areas of the United States. If you want to buy a handgun for your own self-defense in New York City or probably Los Angeles, you're out of luck. You can't do it. And you can say all you want that you've got a Second Amendment right to bear arms. Nobody cares. There are all these exceptions to it. The same thing not only can happen, but is happening in regard to the First Amendment today. And it is happening in particular and by the energy of, most notably, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is the 57 government Muslim body that is the largest voting bloc today and has been since the collapse of the Soviet Union in the United Nations. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation has been embarked for several years now on a concerted and active effort, a multi-pronged, multifaceted effort to destroy the freedom of speech in the United States in particular and in the West in general, and to compel Western states to criminalize criticism of Islam. And the reason why they want to criminalize criticism of Islam is because criticism of Islam is forbidden in Islamic law. If I were to stand up and say that this section of the Quran that was so ably recited by Kasra is hateful because it enjoins warfare upon Jews and Christians, in verse 29 that was up there before that, and that it says that the Jews and Christians are under a curse because they believe, supposedly the Jews believe in Ezra as the Son of God, at least so it is asserted in this verse, and Jesus as the Son of God by the Christians, they are under Allah's curse. If I say, well, that's a hateful thing to say and can incite to violence, well then, that under Islamic law is blasphemy and carries the death penalty. Thank you. Now, in Islamic law, criticism of Islam is forbidden, particularly to the unbelievers. The unbelievers, as we saw actually in the verse that preceded this, which says, fight against those who do not believe in Allah and His Messenger, and do not forbid what He has forbidden, even if they are of the people of the book, until they pay the jizya, the tax, with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. The Jews and Christians, the people of the book, who have to feel themselves subdued under Islamic law, enter into what is called the zumma or the dimma, the contract of protection. The contract of protection is kind of like the contract of protection that Don Corleone offered to the shopkeepers in Lower Manhattan. If you don't get out of line, if you pay into the system, you will not be killed. If you do, your life is forfeit. The non-Muslims who submit with willing submission, they pay the tax, the jizya, and they feel themselves subdued. Their lives are protected in the Islamic State. But if they stop submitting and feeling themselves subdued, and if they start to speak out and say, wait a minute, this is unjust. I believe in equality of rights of all people before the law, and I'm being oppressed. then their lives are forfeit. They are not submitting. They are not feeling themselves subdued. Criticism of Islam is forbidden as an act of rebellion by the non-Muslims under Islamic law. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation is trying to bring Islamic law to the world, because the Organization of Islamic Cooperation obviously believes that Islam is the true religion and that all of us would benefit from living in an Islamic state. They are trying, because they cannot, the Islamic states of the world cannot militarily conquer the United States or Western Europe at this time. They are trying by various other means to bring elements of Islamic law to the West and impose them upon us. Principal among these is this Islamic blasphemy law, that criticism of Islam ought not to be allowed and is punishable by death. In accord with this, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has introduced, for several years running now, non-binding resolutions at the United Nations calling upon member states to criminalize what they call incitement to religious hatred. There have been various formulations of this. That's one of the most recent. Defamation of religions is another, religions in the plural, although the only religion that ever gets its nose out of joint after being supposedly insulted is Islam, so we all knew what they were talking about. But in any case, the resolutions were always opposed by the United States on free speech grounds. And they were saying, if any group, if any idea, if any ideology or belief system is placed above criticism, then from that privileged position, it can work its will untrammeled on the rest of us, and that would be bad for free societies and free people. However, last year, the Obama administration signed on to the latest of these resolutions, Resolution 1618, at the United Nations, and it was passed. Now, the United Nations, at this point, this is a showdown that's going to have to come, because the U.S. Constitution says that treaties that the U.S. signs have the force of law in the United States. And so what the showdown has to happen is, will the United Nations rulings supersede the U.S. Constitution? That has not yet been decided, but it's coming down to it. Because Resolution 1618 binds the United States to work toward criminalizing criticism of Islam or incitement to religious hatred. Now, it's the same thing. Obviously, nobody is in favor of hatred. Lots of people think that I am. It's not true. But hatred is the means by which this whole tyrannical idea of restricting the freedom of speech is advancing, by calling it hate. Hate is in the eye of the beholder. I can say that that's hate, and you might say, if you're a Muslim, no, that's the beautiful word of Allah. And it's not hate. Who gets to decide? That's the key question. Who gets to decide what hate is? They're the ones who have the power. They're the ones who are in control. The people who get to decide what constitutes incitement to religious hatred under Resolution 1618 of the UN, they are the ones who are defining what is acceptable thought and what is not, what is acceptable in the society and what is not, and they are the ones who have the power, in other words, to control and restrict the freedom of thought and thereby the way in which the society develops in innumerable ways. Since obviously if some things are forbidden to be thought, then they're not likely to lead to policy. So anyway, the United States, the UN resolution says, well, countries that have things like the First Amendment, they obviously have to respect that. But they need to work on ways to get around it. And of course, Hillary Clinton famously said that in the United States, of course, we have the freedom of speech, so we need to practice good old public shaming of those who get out of line, as if this were, I don't know, colonial Massachusetts. And what are you going to do? Put the Islamophobes in the stocks? But in any case, public shaming, she said. But obviously all this is moving toward restricting the freedom of speech. All it takes is a hate speech law. And here again, whatever is hate is, whoever decides what hate is, they're the ones who are really the tyrants in control of the whole public debate. The hate speech laws have already come to the United States in the guise of hate crimes laws. There are already hate crimes laws on the books. The hate crime works like this. If I beat you up and steal your wallet, that's a crime. Don't worry, I won't do it. However, if I beat you up and take your wallet while calling you a racial slur, that's a hate crime. That's the way the United States law works right now. So hate crime obviously depends upon speech. And there is forbidden speech in the United States. All you need is 5 Supreme Court justices who will say, yes, we have the freedom of speech, but criticism of Islam or defamation of religions or incitement to religious hatred or whatever they want to call it is hate speech and does not enjoy freedom of speech protections, and that's it. Now, the insidious thing about this is that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has explicitly added counter-terror analysis to its list of things that are offensive and criticizing of Islam. Because obviously, if the Muslim terrorists are shouting Allahu Akbar and quoting the Quran before they kill people, well, that if you're going to analyze their motives and goals and beliefs so as to be able to defeat them more effectively, you have to go into Islam. But if that's hate speech and it's not allowed, then those same terrorists can go ahead without anybody stopping them, because we're not allowed to discuss what they're all about. We can't understand them. We're forbidden to understand them. And that is actually the case in the United States today. The Obama administration has carried out a systematic purge of counter-terror material used by the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Homeland Security, in order to separate out anything having to do with Islam from counter-terror analysis. Now, that's fine if all the terrorists were really the right-wing extremists of Janet Napolitano's nightmares. But if you really do have Islamic terrorists blowing things up and quoting Quran in order to justify doing so and to gain new recruits among peaceful Muslims, well, then we got a problem. And the problem is worse than that, too. Recently, of course, it's been in the news that there was this attack in Benghazi at the consulate. 4 Americans were killed, and it seems as if the Obama administration knew right away that it was Al-Qaeda and covered it up. And the extent of which this is an issue or a political football or anything like that, that actually is not really something that concerns me. What concerns me about this is that it was covered up in the way that it was. Because one thing we do know that they did not kill Ambassador Stevens and the 3 others about was this Muhammad video. This Muhammad video had 17 views on YouTube when it became an issue. Yeah, you can look it up. And nobody cared about it. There are also thousands of things like it on YouTube. Search around and you'll see. So why did the Obama administration, if they knew from the CIA that it was Al-Qaeda right away, which seems to be the case at this point, why did they come out, and all of them, Obama, Clinton, Susan Rice, Jay Carney, and others, they all said, it's the video, it's the video, it's the video. People were enraged about this video. The tacit lesson there, the signal, the implication, the subtext is, it was our fault. If we would just shut up about Islam and stop bothering them about Muhammad, then the ambassador would be alive today. It's up to us. And this is the lesson that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation is actively trying to teach, as absurd as it sounds. And it is absurd. I'll tell you, recently, Iran's Press TV, which is an official television station of the Islamic Republic of Iran, they ran a story about this whole controversy. And they said that this Muhammad movie was designed to stir up anti-Muslim sentiment, and it succeeded, with many killed as a result. Now wait a minute, think about that for a minute. How many people did those Muhammad filmmakers actually murder? Correct. How many people were actually murdered by Islamic jihadists and Islamic supremacists who, in their rage over this video, supposedly, were driven to murder innocent people? all of the ones, all the people who were killed. But the Iran's press TV says the movie was designed to stir up anti-Muslim sentiment, and it succeeded, with many killed as a result. Even if the movie were designed to stir up anti-Muslim sentiment, nobody needed to have been killed as a result. That was up to the killers. That was not up to the movie makers. You could stand up now, and I expect some of you will, and say, well, you're a bigoted, racist hate monger. And I have a number of reactions I could make if you called me that. I could say, well, that's not true, and give you a detailed explanation of why what I'm doing is in defense of human rights and the equality of all people. Or I could burst into tears and run out of the room. Or I could take my concealed handgun and shoot you dead. Or any number of other reactions. Who decides which one of those reactions I will make? I do. So, let's take that lesson and expand it. Muhammad video over here. Pakistani Muslims hear about Muhammad video and they begin to riot and kill. Do they have to riot and kill? Is that the only reaction possible to them? Who is in control of their deciding to riot and kill? Whose fault is that? Whose responsibility is that? Theirs and theirs alone. They could have put out their own movie and said, this movie is false, and here's the truth about Muhammad. They could have done any number of things. Instead, they killed people. And then Press TV, and this is maybe even worse, is blaming the Muhammad video filmmakers for their murders. And, even worse, so did Obama and Clinton and Susan Rice. And so, we have the spectacle of the United States government being opposed to the United States Constitution. And having lost basic ideas of human responsibility, such that it doesn't understand that one controls one's own reactions and is trying to work to restrict the freedom of speech in order to supposedly keep anti-Muslim sentiment from breaking out so more people don't get killed. So, the lesson here is, if I want to shut you up, I start killing people over here and you'll shut up, right? That's the lesson. And so we are in essentially now the U.S. government is saying terrorism works. You want to shut me up? Kill some people and we will be quiet and behave. And we will obey the blasphemy laws, the laws that criminalize criticism of Islam. And we will voluntarily submit and give that up. One thing now, since the rest of our panelists have arrived, I will be brief for once and wrap up, but I did want to mention before I left, Bubba the Love Sponge. I know you're probably all fans of Bubba the Love Sponge. Well, Bubba the Love Sponge actually is a radio host in Florida. And he recently was in the news because part of this ongoing Benghazi business is the fact that the CIA director, General Petraeus, and his successor as the commander of the troops in Afghanistan, General Allen, were both involved with this mysterious woman in Florida, Jill Kelly, Jill Kawam. And we don't know what really was going on here, but one thing did come out. And that is that there's a radio host named Bubba the Love Sponge who had announced that he was going to deep fat fry the Quran. Yes. I mean, I think it's a waste of a good deep fat fryer, but in any case, he was going to deep fat fry the Quran. And Petraeus and Allen are over in Afghanistan, and they know what's going to happen if he deep fat fries the Quran and it gets out over in Kabul. They know what's going to happen. People are going to get killed. So they had a teaching moment. They had a teaching moment opportunity. They could have said to the noble people of Afghanistan, as General Allen referred to them in his video abjectly apologizing for an earlier Quran incident, to the noble people of Afghanistan, I tell you, grow up. He could have said that. He could have said, stop killing people who have nothing to do with whatever's bothering you. And stop being bothered about what some idiot does half a world away. It doesn't hurt your Quran. It doesn't hurt you. Shut up. Now, he could have said that. He didn't. What General Petraeus and General Allen did was contact Jill Kelly and plead with her to contact Bubba the Love Sponge and get him to not deep fat fry the Quran. That's two United States generals, one of them who became the head of the CIA, and they're worried to death about Bubba the Love Sponge. And in the face of violent intimidation and violent actions against the freedom of speech, instead of trying to explain the value and importance of the freedom of speech, they move to shut up an American who is exercising his freedom of expression in order to placate and appease those violent thugs. This is halfway around the world. This is a very serious situation that we have over the next 4 years. Like I said, it only takes 5 justices, and the freedom of speech is dead. And with it, the American Republic and free society in general. And so the fundamental struggle, or jihad, if you will, that we face today as free people is to preserve and protect the freedom of speech. Because if we do not, at this point, if we are not able to articulate to our friends and our neighbors, if we are not able to make a passionate and powerful case in its defense, if we are not able to prevail upon our legislators to resist any and all attempts to restrict it, then we will surely lose it, and we will all be the poorer for it. And our children and grandchildren will look back at our generation as the one that allowed freedom to be extinguished. Thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're kind of moving backwards in the sense that I'm going to be introducing people after their speeches now. I was driving here with Nani Darwish, and we got a little bit lost, but we figured out there were some suspicious people tampering with our GPS before we left. Ladies and gentlemen, a great honor to be here, and I guess I'll just very briefly say, since we've already started our panel on freedom of speech versus blasphemy in Islam. Robert, have you been introduced yet?
No. Hi.
For those of you that don't know, Robert Spencer, great modern-day warrior on behalf of freedom and liberty. He's the director of Jihad Watch, a program of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. He's the author of 12 books, including 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Truth About Muhammad and The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam. And his latest book is Did Muhammad Exist? An Inquiry into Islam's Obscure Origins. But you've done a biography about Muhammad, but also the question, did Muhammad exist? But it's not contradictory, right, Robert?
No.
Can you speak on that for a minute?
Is this thing on?
Yeah.
No, it's not contradictory in the least. The Truth About Muhammad explains what the earliest Islamic sources say about Muhammad, which is good for us to know because there are people around the world who wish us ill on the basis of what they believe Muhammad said and did. And so in the course of researching that book and wanting to base it on the earliest available Muslim sources, I found that actually those earliest available Muslim sources were not all that early and were very historically questionable, to say the least. So I returned to the question in Did Muhammad Exist? And examine the historical value of all that material. It's important to know what it is, again, because Muslims believe it, and that impinges upon all people. And then it is also important to know its historical value for a variety of reasons involving what we do about the jihad threat. And so The Truth About Muhammad and Did Muhammad Exist? Available at any self-respecting bookstore. Get yours now.
Now, not to bore the audience too much or too much of a distraction, but Robert, I think it's an interesting detail out of your own life that you had begun your intellectual journey in part looking into Islam, becoming a Muslim. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah.
Can you speak on that for 30 seconds or a minute?
Well, I used to believe in Muhammad, but not like that. I used to believe that Muhammad existed. Is that what you mean?
No, I mean, but in the beginning.
Oh, you mean the very beginning?
Yeah. When you started...
way back before any of you were born, when I was in college. I started to read the Quran. I had a lot of Muslim friends, and started to read the Quran simply as sort of spiritual quest mode, but ran up against a lot of material like what used to be up on the wall, and it also resonated with my family's personal history as being from the Islamic world and having been exiled for declining the invitation to convert to Islam. And so I ended up not converting to Islam, except inadvertently one day.
Is that a long story?
It's a short, very briefly.
Okay.
I was just showing off that I could say the Shahada, the Islamic confession of faith, in Arabic. And so I was having lunch with my friend Mahmoud, and I said the Shahada in Arabic. And he said, "Oh, you're a Muslim now." You know, the Shahada is, "There's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet." I'm not going to say it in Arabic because there might be a Muslim in the room. If you say it in the presence of a Muslim male, then you're a Muslim. And so I said, "Wait a minute, I didn't mean it. I was just showing you I could say it." And he said, "Doesn't matter. You said it. I'm a Muslim. I'm the witness. You're a Muslim." And so now you know, I too am an apostate.
Thank you, Robert. And as you see, there was another potential career as a stand-up comedian. Ladies and gentlemen, two other heroes here with us this evening. Raymond Ibrahim, a Middle East and Islam specialist and author of The Al-Qaeda Reader, a book which exposed Al-Qaeda's doublespeak based on their own words. Formerly, he was an Arabic language researcher at the Library of Congress and then the associate director of the Middle East Forum. He's born in the United States to Egyptian parents. He is fluent in Arabic and has traveled regularly to and is intimate with the Middle East. He's currently a Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and he writes regularly for Front Page Magazine. He's also, as you can tell, a former bodybuilder. And he told me that we don't even need security tonight.
No, Jamie, I'm the former bodybuilder.
But you should all know that Raymond never wears a suit because he just can't fit into one because he continues his bodybuilding. And on my left, with whom I got lost this evening, but it was a spiritual journey, Nani Darwish, an Egyptian-American human rights activist, founder of Arabs for Israel, and director of Former Muslims United. She's the author of several books, including her latest, The Devil We Don't Know, The Dark Side of Revolutions in the Middle East. And I'm, by the way, Jamie Glazoff. I'm the editor of FrontPageMag.com. And I think we'll let Nani catch a couple more breaths, and we'll let the bodybuilder go. Okay?
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Can you hear this? Can you hear me now? How about now? Okay. Okay, the topic that I'd like to discuss is something of basically a great irony insofar as this whole business about Islam and defamation and blasphemy. And it's an irony that I believe is wholly missed on Muslims, first and foremost, which is basically that if, as the OIC, as we heard, and any number of other Islamic organizations and bodies wish to enforce and create a defamation law for religions, because as Robert just pointed out, they always say we want all religions protected, but of course in reality it's for Islam. But they always use this sort of language that is inclusive and says all religions need to be respected, no one should defame them, etc., etc. And so the irony, of course, that I'd like to discuss is if this law ever came to pass, and if there was any logic involved in the world, Islam itself would be completely banned, because it is the only religion that is fundamentally based on defaming and disparaging and blackening every other religion. And this is one of the greatest irony that I fail to understand how so many people are missing, especially Muslims. So first, let me, just to kind of set the stage, give you a few quotes, all in the context of the Muhammad YouTube movie that created or was used as a pretext for havoc, death, and destruction, as usual. The OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, issued a statement saying that it deplored an offensive and derogatory film on the life of Prophet Muhammad and called on the producers to show respect to the religious sentiments held sacred by Muslims and those of other faiths. because the OIC wants you to know that it respects all religions. This isn't just about themselves. Okay. The Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan, when the film came out and all the havoc and riots, said that the film insults religions, plural. And then he called for, and this is a quote, international legal regulations against attacks on what people, not just Muslims, deem sacred. Again, he used it in a very inclusive way to point out that we, Muslims, are against attacks or derogatory statements or blasphemy or anything else against religions. Even Saudi Arabia's Grand Mufti, who a year earlier issued a fatwa saying every single church anywhere near the Arabian Peninsula must be destroyed according to Islamic law, and actually according to Muhammad's deathbed wish, which was basically that no two religions can be practiced in the Arabian Peninsula. This same man actually issued, in response to the Muhammad movie, the YouTube one, he called for a global ban on insults targeting all religious figures. And then the Grand Mufti, the Grand Imam of Egypt's Al-Azhar, again the top Islamic figure of Egypt and one of the highest Islamic institutions, called for a UN resolution outlawing insulting symbols and sanctities of Islam and other religions. Okay, so keep in mind that all of these organizations make it a point to say we don't want any religion to be attacked. And they have to do that because, of course, why should the international community really care or give them ear if it's only about Islam? So they have to use that line. Now, to continue, we have to define real quickly, so what is defamation? Because that's usually the word used in the context when these topics come up in the UN and international bodies. Definition of defamation, just to give you typical standard dictionary definitions, is basically to blacken another's reputation or a false or unjustified injury of the good reputation of another, as by slander or libel, or basically to disparage and offend the beliefs of someone else. This is defamation, and I think most Muslims would agree, yes, this is what defamation is, and they want it outlawed for Islam and, technically speaking, for all religions. Okay, so then we come to a big problem. What then do we do with the fact that Islam's core religious texts, beginning with the Quran itself, followed by the Hadith, and followed by the edicts and the verdicts of the ulama, which is basically, in Arabic, what's known as usul al-fiqh. Usul al-fiqh is basically all of those texts and documents that formulate Islamic law and basically define what is right and wrong in Islam. What are they? The first one is the Quran, of course. The second one is the Hadith, which is basically the recorded words and sayings of Muhammad, as well as the companions, the righteous companions, including the first four caliphs. And after that, another major source of what formulates right and wrong in Sharia is basically the ulama, or the Islamic scholars, and if they ever reach a consensus on something, then it becomes part of Islamic law. So, let's begin at looking at a few Quranic verses. Quran 573 declares, in no unequivocal terms, and I'm reading as a quote, that infidels are they who say Allah is one of three, which is a reference to the Christian Trinity. Quran 572 says infidels are they who say Allah is the Christ, basically Jesus, and then it says Son of Mary. And Quran 930 goes on to say, the Christians say the Christ is the Son of Allah, may Allah's curse be upon them. Okay, so now I have a question, and this would be a question to Muslims basically. What if a Christian book, an authoritative Christian book, say the Bible, went out of the way and wrote in it, and it said, infidels are they who say Muhammad is the prophet of God, Allah's curse upon them? Would that not be defamation? Would that not anger Muslims? Would that not cause riots and havoc and destruction? And here it is in the Quran, and yet apparently it's not deemed a defamation against other religions, in this case Christianity. Let's look at another source, the Hadith. As I mentioned, the Quran is the pillar. The second pillar amongst Sunnis, of course, is the Hadith, the recorded sayings. There's a Hadith that says that the Christian cross, which is, of course, venerated among millions of Christians of all denominations, is, of course, defamed and disparaged against in Islam. Muhammad himself insists in a hadith that when Jesus returns, he will be so angry at the concept of the cross that it will be his first thing to do is to destroy all the crucifixes of the world and then kill the pigs. But first he's going to destroy all the crucifixes. Now this is a canonical hadith, and these are the words of Muhammad. Muhammad himself, whenever he entered in a place and he saw any object that looked like a cross, would destroy it. And when he would meet anyone who had a cross on, would tell them, take that idolatry thing off. So now I wonder, the question of course to Muslims would be, what if a Christian book basically said that the sacred things of Islam, one of the most being the black stone of the Kaaba in Mecca, the meteor, the black stone that they all venerate and revolve around and kiss. What if someone said that, what if a Christian book said that Muhammad, when he returns, is going to destroy the black stone because it was a piece of idolatry? What kind of reaction would that prompt among Muslims? Would that be something that you can just ignore and brush aside, no big deal? Or would that actually create a lot more havoc than we've seen so far? Now let's look at the top Islamic scholars and the sort of things that they've said, their exegeses. One of the most famous, of course, is Ibn Kathir, known as Ibn Kathir, and I think he thrived in the 13th century. Now, he actually, based on some Quranic verses and hadiths, his interpretation is that Muhammad said he will be married in paradise to Mary, the daughter of Imran. And of course, Imran and that whole kind of understanding in the Quran means Mary, the mother of Jesus. She will basically be one of Muhammad's many wives. So a question, what if a Christian book said that one of Muhammad's wives, precious young Aisha, the mother of believers, is in heaven married to a false prophet and married to him, and this came out in a book about a book really saying that Muslims, your wonderful Aisha, the wife of prophet, the mother of believers, is married to some guy in heaven, and she's just one of his many wives, not Muhammad, some other guy. Now, and these sorts of things are not, I've quoted to you from the fundamental sources of Islam, the Quran, the Hadith, and the words of the ulama, and the verdicts that they've issued in their fatwas. And this sort of thing these are classical documents now I've told you of, but it really doesn't end there. I just saw recently on a very popular Islamic website called Islam Web, which issues Arabic fatwas, an entire fatwa based on justifying and saying it is permissible for Muslims to curse and demean Christianity. And then they clarify the Christianity that is the false Christianity, that is the one that every Christian believes in, not the mythical Christianity of the Quran, which never existed and has no basis. And so here you have a fatwa legitimizing and saying in an Islamic context it is okay for Muslims to curse and make fun of and disparage Christianity. So what do we do with this? Now the greater irony of all this is that what has caused Muslims to riot and destroy and havoc and all this? Cartoons, movies. Now the people who drew these cartoons, the people who make these movies, they are representative of only themselves. They don't represent Christianity, they don't represent Judaism. They're people who they have no authority insofar, they're not theologians, they have no grounding, and they're just sole individuals who represent only themselves, and they made things like a movie or they made a cartoon and they created mass riots and havoc. Okay? Now this is the great irony to me, and yet here we have the fundamental core text of Islam. The entire Islamic worldview based on extremely disparaging things about other religions. I mentioned, I just focused on Christianity, but of course I could point out that in the Quran, in God's Word, Jews are monkeys and pigs. That's also a bit offensive, you would think. How would Muslims react if the Bible said Muslims are monkeys and pigs? And those who say that Muhammad is the prophet of Allah are infidels. Allah's curse on them. So you have to understand that there is an immense and absurd, in my mind, discrepancy in this whole debate. That if they really want to push this to the limit and say that we want to ban anything, any document, anything that basically offends religions, plural, Islam is going to have to go, or at least big chunks of its texts, and that's not something I believe Muslims want. So I think this is the issue that needs to be brought up, and this is one of the topics I think when this blasphemy issue comes about, people should actually try to remember this, because to me it's just ludicrous to hear people complaining about one man who made one movie and doesn't represent anything except himself, and all of a sudden the whole world has to stand up as Muslims riot and burn and kill, and then the core essence of their religion is built on defaming everyone else in very ugly terms. And it just, of course, doesn't end with defamation. I wish it did. There's, of course, as we saw, the opening verse, Quran 9:29, where it says, "Fight those who do not believe in Allah or in the last day, and who do not consider unlawful what Allah and His Messenger have made unlawful, and who do not accept the religion of truth, which is Islam, from the people of the book," which is basically Jews and Christians, "until they willingly pay tribute or jizya and feel themselves utterly subdued." So here we have books, a religious book that commands people to not only curse and to condemn and to say all terrible things about other people's beliefs, but it also incites them to go on the offensive in violence and to subjugate them. And I think it is this issue, Islam's perceived divine right to defame and destroy, that the international community should be addressing, not silly cartoons and not silly films. And I think that's kind of that's one of the topics I'd like to see brought more into this entire debate that I don't see, because the hypocrisy is just overbearing, in my opinion. And that's it. Thank you.